Hello, welcome to The Exhausted Programmer. My name is Alexander, and today we'll continue our series on awk by taking a look at very short scripts. Similar to previous videos on this channel, there will be a link in the description to a GitHub account that has the files that are used in this, plus some notes where you can follow along and you don't have to write everything down by pausing the screen. So take a look there. But for this video, there will be a new file called logging. And it's pretty simple. The idea is I've recreated 3 unique error messages, a warning message, and a debug message, and we're going to use that for our example today. Now the truth is that almost every example I've given in awk for this whole series has been something to do with the awk programming language. It just doesn't feel much like a programming language. In the past, we've looked at even a function called length. You can have conditional statements like if statements that, if true, will execute the line after. What this line is doing is it's looking at the length of each line of the file that we showed right before this, seeing if it's greater than the value of max, and if it is, reset the value of max to that same length so that we'll know the longest length of the file. This, though, won't actually print anything. That's because we didn't tell it to print anything. So to fix that, we just put in a print statement like we've seen before, print the max value, and when we do that, it prints 31, 36, 37, 43, 43, and when we took a look at our file, that makes sense. This is 31 characters long, 36, 37, 43, and since this one is not bigger than 43, it doesn't reset the value of max, so it prints 43 again. 2 things I want to point out right now is that we never told awk what max would be. That would be an int, or it starts at value 0. Awk does certain things to make this inline stuff a lot easier, but if you're a strong typed programmer or something along those lines, you might not like it. But that's just the case. If you give it a new variable that hasn't been defined yet, it will assume that the value is 0. Also, in previous videos, we did conditional printing and we didn't use the if keyword. In order to recreate that, we can change the line to just have the conditional first and then write the code that we want it to do if the conditional is met. And it will do this for each line to check to see what it needs to be. And again, it will print the values for each line, but only when it updates the value of max. So I didn't do it for the last line. Something I have mentioned in previous videos is that I do like to keep my line lengths into 80 columns long. It's an old standard, but a standard nonetheless that if we can keep it, why not keep it? And I just wanted to make that clear going forward. I'm going to be using backslashes. First, I need to explain that this semicolon here is for awk, because what awk wants to do is run a line and then run a second line, but we're going to use the semicolon to tell it that this is one line and this is the end of that line. This is similar to C, but it's more similar to something like Python, where you can use semicolons to put 2 commands on the same line, where the semicolon is useful in awk to let awk know that this is one line, this is a second line. Bash, on the other hand, has something we can use to let it know that it all should be one line, even when it's more than one line on our screen, and that is the backslash. With the backslash, it will read all the way up to here just like it did, but when it sees the backslash, and do make sure there's no spaces afterwards, when you hit enter, it will continue on to the next line, but when you hit enter one more time, it'll run it as if it is one line. This is really good for readability and something I'll be using going forward. I just want to explain that this is because of bash and readability, not because of awk. So we have this command here that prints out every time max is reset, that is when this condition is set. So the first line, and every time a new line comes along that's bigger than the previous, it'll print out. But that's not what we would want. We'd want to know just the max line and nothing else. And for that, I'm going to introduce the last part of this video, which is the beginning and end blocks. So first, let's just show an example. In this case, we're going to do the same condition, the same resetting of max, but then we're going to close out the code block with this curly brace here to match with this one. And then, as we continue on the same line, then we define the next block will be the end block. And this block will only run one time at the very end, and that's when we're going to print. And when we do this, we only get the 43 because that's the only time we told it to print. So when you have a beginning, a middle, and an end code block, or even multiple code blocks, as we'll see in our final example, the way it works is that the beginning block runs only one time. It runs once, however many lines it is. It can be multiple lines, and it'll do everything before it starts consuming anything inside the file. Then the file will be read record by record, which in our case is line by line because the record separator is set to being a new line. And for each line, it'll run the entire part of the middle block or middle blocks for each line. And then once it's done running all those and has ran through every record in a file, then it will do the end block. We don't have a beginning block here, so all it's doing is reading in the first record, which is the first line, doing the conditional statement, running the code, going into the second line. Same thing until it's done consuming all the lines. And then at the end, it does our print statement. So for our final example, and the reason why we're even looking at an error logging example, is we can run a script like this. What it will do is before it consumes the file in any way, it will do this begin block where I'm setting the field separator to the colon because that's what we're using to separate the type of error from the error message itself. And then it will print out this line, error, comma, warning, comma, debug. Then it'll go into the first line and see if that first field is an error. And if it's so, it will count up the error count. Or if it's a warning, it'll count up the warning. If it's a debug, it'll count up the debug. And then when it's finally done, it'll print the error, warning, and debug variables, which are the counts for each one of this logging file. And when we run it, we see that there were 3 errors, 1 warning, and 1 debug. And again, if we look at our logging, we see that that's the case. Now, I could have formatted this differently, used spaces instead of commas, and maybe spaced them out or whatever. But the point is the output of this is a CSV file. And so if we were to pipe this information to a new file or append it to an existing file, however we want to do it, we could have a running total of the messages. And so if you have daily logging and you can take that logging file, get the number of error warnings and debugs, and then you could track it over time and create nice graphs for business propositions and proposals in order to wow the people outside of the technology side of your code, showing that errors have been going down or warnings or whatever. Now, typing this whole thing out every day would be kind of annoying, and we will be looking in a future video on how to write awk scripts that can be executed as files, similar to how you might write a Python script or something along those lines. Awk can be a very useful tool for some quick data analysis, and hopefully this shows a good example of how you could use it in your own personal or business uses. In the next video, we're going to take a look at more about the variables that are already defined by awk. In this example, we defined variables that didn't exist, and we also reset the fs variable, which we've talked about in the past. The next video, we'll take a look at all the variables that are default in awk. And the video after that, we'll take a look at longer scripting. And I think that'll be the end of this series. So if you have any questions about awk that you really want to make it into the series, you better drop them below pretty soon because it'll probably be done in about 2 weeks. If you have any other comments about this or any other topic, feel free to drop them below. If you like what you saw, do the like and subscribe thing, and thanks for watching.